visible. So,
Yeah.
so here, but Boshaki and Miguel will be with you.
Sure.
If you were
Feels a little too formal to me. Do you want to just take the podium
well,
away?
so if you and you'll stand.
Yeah, I usually just stand
Okay,
above.
without the podium. So you don't want to put your papers here.
I think so. It feels very formal.
Okay. I felt that way too, but then I thought, well, if it was just this group here, we'd be all sitting.
Yeah.
Like, there's going to be people on those sides
Right.
that won't see you if you're sitting. So okay,
Yeah.
move this,
Move
and
that, and I'll just get up and talk. And
Okay.
It'll be great.
All right, I'll talk to Joe about making sure we capture you if you move around.
Want
at all.
to do hand mic?
Let me ask him what he. Yeah.
Yeah, just put that down there. That's great.
What we do is I can shove. Oh.
Hey. And also, if she moves around, will her audio be captured?
Not
no,
as well.
She'll have to stay near that.
That's
You don't
what
have
the
a
lapel-
hand.
I have a. You want a hand up?
Yeah, I could hand. You don't have a lapel?
I have a lapel, but
Okay.
someone said you didn't like to use the lapel.
That must have gone in the record somewhere.
I don't know why that
Yeah,
happened. No,
scratch
I-
that note.
there probably was a thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Would you say you prefer a lapel?
Yeah, I
And
think
then
that would
we'll-
be
And then
easiest.
we'll have the handhelds for the questions.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah. Okay. I have to get rid of all this junk. Yeah. Some of it, yeah, I know. So it'll be a lot better if you don't have this stuff.
Oh, you know what? It's all
It's all connected.
zip tied in.
Okay.
I can. Let's see if it's long enough. I
Maybe
can
some of
just
it
shove
can
it
be done.
down.
This is that even okay? Yeah. I guess
Oh
it
yeah.
is. Yeah.
Do you have an inside? This one's right here.
No.
And then ideally up underneath.
Yeah.
So,
So just have to-
I think that's all. And if I show you this is here, and then if you would just tuck that wire right in, this one, like this This one, well, it might be funny, but it was totally.
Hanging. Trying to get this stuff out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dangling, it's okay?
Yeah.
And I'll go under there.
Okay. You got pants on. Thanks, Joe. Not very ladylike. Oh, this one's stuck here. No, this is just like taped. That's okay. That was good. Oh yeah. Oh cool. Yeah, yeah. Right, this is the breakfast club. It's 8:39, so you can then go chat, get something to eat if you want.
It's great.
Excuse me. If you can hide that in your pocket, this here, just can you turn that sideways so it's buried in there? It's just showing a little bit on camera. This whole unit, can that? Yeah, you can bend
I
that.
gotta turn, can you mute?
You are muted.
Oh, I am.
Yeah, I just wanted to get that. Just so we don't see too many wires if possible. I can just bend right in if you mind. My favorite Martian. I'm going way back to the 60s. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, we'll just be a little funky. Looks like a little necklace that drips down. Can I put these things over on the the podium?
Yeah.
All right, and because you.
I do need my glasses, yeah.
All right, I'm just gonna start for a little bit.
Sure, why not?
So, sound check. I don't have to squat down and go like this? Okay. That's good. All right.
Oh, she's kidding.
So, welcome everyone. I think I might know everyone in this room, but just in case, we are recording this. I'm Meg Story Groves. I'm the class of '85, and I'm the Associate Vice President of Alumni and Parent Programs. I work closely with the Alumni Board, and several of them are here today putting in a 4-day work weekend. But this is not just work. This is pleasure and enjoyment and education. So thank you, Alumni Board, for coming in on Thursday and sticking it out to today. There are trustees in the room, former trustees in the room, lots of great mix of people, and I'm really glad you're here. I've had the pleasure of working with Miguel for this earlier in the year on reimagining equity and inclusion events in DC and New York and San Francisco. And we thought that it would be great to sort of continue this conversation on today while we have people here for homecoming and ALC. So I thank Miguel for his time, and it was really great to hear the conversations in these 3 cities. And I mentioned that we're going to be recording it, so we'll have microphones for the Q&A, just so it can all be captured. And we're in fine hands with our media services folks. And Miguel and Boishaki are here to help with questions that you might have, drilling deeper into the areas of their world here at Middlebury. So again, thank you for being here, and we're starting 5 minutes early. This is great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meg. And we do have a handout for you. So what I think we're going to do is just hand that around now. And I think we have enough to go around. And if we don't, if spouses and partners and things wouldn't mind sharing, that would be most appreciated. And friends, yes, friends, please share also. I think a whole bunch of people just got married in this room. Okay, right. Okay, so part of what I love about the title of these sessions that we've been having and dinners, small group dinners we've been having all over the country now and hope to have more about, is the phrase reimagining. We are now in a space, and this is something that I've been thinking about a lot over the summer and into the fall. The combination of social polarization, climate change, and wealth inequality means leading in that space is no longer a question of degree. It's a little more intense. Wait, it's a lot more intense. It's actually a difference in kind. I don't know the full answer, the next steps on that insight, but I do know that it's true. And I would love your help. All of you are leaders in some way or other, not just at Middlebury. And it also means when I don't have an immediate sort of 10 steps that I'm now going to take, or our groups are now going to take, or our team is now going to take, it means we're at a really creative spot. It's a really genuine spot of not knowing the next thing. And I begin with that because Toni Morrison, who is one of my great mentors intellectually, only met her once, but it was a deep privilege. Because she passed, I started reading her essays, actually, a beautiful set of essays I would highly recommend to you, called The Source of Self-Regard. And she's a phenomenal essayist. Every sentence you have to read 2 or 3 times to sort of gain the insight that she talks about. And in her Nobel acceptance speech, she said, that was included in this set of essays, she said, when you are in a time of chaos, you have a different way of responding. And there are, generally speaking, people think about this, there are 2 different responses to being and leading in a time of chaos. The first is violence, and the second is naming what is happening. In my address to the faculty and also in conversations with students and staff, I talk about the naming part as what the progress and process of education and educators is naming what is happening around us. But then Morrison goes on to articulate a third thing, and that is creativity. Creativity is what artists do, what writers do, and I deeply believe what educators do. And I think that we approach this idea and this project of reimagining Middlebury at a time in its history where it doesn't look anything like it ever did, right? It's a deeply new Middlebury on so many different levels. It is more excellent than it's ever been before. It takes an absolute sense of mission, profundity, and awe truly to understand the relationship between diversity and excellence, and that they always go hand in hand. And that is a hard project and an important project because our historical memories are not as diverse as our present reality. And that is something that we deal with every day on the Middlebury campus. So that exhortation that Morrison has to all of us to creativity is so important in this historical moment in our country, in our world, in our natural world. So that's kind of a preface to the three principles that I usually bring to, and the team has instantiated in a really wonderful way, to the work of equity and inclusion. The first is that of access. On a daily basis, we have very little idea of the ways that we are not giving all of our students access. And that is such an important piece of becoming aware in this work of diversity and inclusion. And that is something that I say because if we think we are aware, then we will stop being aware. Right? If we don't always become vigilant and stay and remain vigilant about where the small little places are that become hard for students who are on scholarship, that become hard for students because they look at a website and say, oh, well, that's not for me, right? Those are the two little things that we encounter every day that my team is working so hard to change. That's number one, access. Second is something I mentioned 4 years ago when I started here, repeat in a number of different ways. Inclusivity is an everyday ethic. Inclusivity is an everyday ethic. It has to be every day. It has to be something that's about working and listening when you get up in the morning and have your coffee till when you go to bed at night and you send that last email. Sorry, I just revealed what my life was, but that's okay. And that's an incredibly important way of thinking about this, because if it's sort of like, oh, let's do an initiative and then we're done, it'll never work. It'll never be the Middlebury that we want it to be. And the third thing that is oddly harder than any of the others, but one that people really wake up when I name this, and that is curiosity. If we are all about making sure that we do it right, and Middlebury is deeply conscientious, its Congregationalist roots are profound, and I say that as a historian of religion. It is ethical, it is thoughtful, it is conscientious, it is always doing self-inventory in the best sense of what we could do better. But where we need to be is in joyful curiosity about each other. And what I exhorted our faculty to do in my talk to them in this fall was to say, are you curious about your students in the classroom? Are you curious in that joyful way? Where do you come from? Or are you so afraid you're going to make a mistake or say something wrong that you're stop being curious? And everyone who goes into education loves being curious, and if they've stopped being curious, they long to connect again to being curious. And so those are the three principles: access, inclusivity is an everyday ethic, and curiosity, that we try to build on and move forward with at Middlebury as we work and embark on this every day on this difficult and exhilarating work. So that's a kind of philosophical preamble to this, which is a long list of work that we're doing. And what I thought I would do is share with you, and then in each situation, and we can open it up, turn to my colleagues who are really instantiating all of these programs on a everyday level, to have them share their experience about each of these initiatives. And we're just incredibly excited, as you can see from the length of the handout. There's a lot that we're doing. And by the way, it's never enough. And by the way, people still get angry. There's still racism, sexism, classism, anti-LGBTQI+ behavior on this campus every day. That is the work. And it's really hard. And when it works, it's incredibly exhilarating. So we'll go from there. So this is not a checklist. This is the beginning of something that will last decades for us at Middlebury. So the first thing that really matters, I think, for us is changing the face of the faculty and increasing diversity in hiring, and faculty and staff. One of the most important things to think about is, how do you create a diverse faculty? One of the usual things that happens when you hire faculty is that people say, well, there's no folks in the pool that are of diverse backgrounds or are first gen. And I started this work at Emory in faculty development, and the answer to that always is, I'm sorry, that's an unacceptable answer. You find the pool, you create the pool, and you go after those folks. And you do so not because there's some kind of sense of, oh, we have to do it, but because over and over again, more diverse faculties are excellent faculties. And as Miguel was saying yesterday, we owe it to our students to give them role models on a daily basis and to reflect the demography that we have in the United States. Miguel was mentioning, and then I'll turn it over to these two, around faculty hiring and staff hiring. When I came to Middlebury, there was nobody of color on my senior team. And then I elevated some folks and hired other folks, and now there are almost 50% people of color on my senior team. That took aggressive, principled, and just going after the right folks when it mattered. But I can already see when students meet, when we welcomed the class, the 3 people that they saw that welcomed the class of our current class that just came in 2019, all of them were people of color. That's really a great message to be sending. And then there are other times when you don't see that as much. But I think it has made a difference in terms of how people understand the work of an administrative body. So I'll turn it over to Miguel and Boishaki, maybe a little bit more Miguel, because you've been more involved in faculty hiring before we go to the next thing.
Sure, I will say that this has been work that I would say maybe my top priority. As we said yesterday, I think admissions has done a very good job about continuing to really build numbers in the student body, but the faculty has lagged far behind. And so it took some structural work, really kind of working with our Educational Affairs Committee to look at what we're asking for. So, some of the structural pieces there are requiring the departments, when they make a proposal for a position, to talk about how this position is actually going to add to diversity and equity in the department, maybe diversify the curriculum in some ways, and also asking all the candidates to supply a statement on how they incorporate their experience working with marginalized groups, or how their research touches upon this, or how they have trained themselves around implicit biases or something of the sort, so that both the candidates and the departments are thinking about this as they move forward. Lori was talking about, the pools, and one of the things we've done, we've been involved with a Mellon grant, the C3 program, where 4 liberal arts colleges have partnered with 4 R1 institutions: Columbia, Berkeley, Michigan, and Chicago. And we took 3 cohorts of postdocs to introduce graduate students from marginalized groups to liberal arts colleges and what that would look like. And part of that initiative was going to the universities and talking to graduate students and postdocs about what a career looks like at a liberal arts college and introducing them. So going to the pool. And I tell you what, I hear from departments, oh, there's just nobody there. And you go to the universities and there are these people thirsty for tenure tracks. So there's a disconnect there. And then we actually expanded that work and started, and we're doing this with a consortium of liberal arts colleges. Because when we go, if I go to one of those with Middlebury and say, hey, we've got 8 positions open this year and it would be great. But if we go as a consortium of 31 liberal arts colleges and say, we have 200 tenure track positions, you get people's attention. And then we expanded it beyond our 4 partner schools and have been going to a number of other universities for that kind of stuff. So just some.
And Mellon, being aware that what happens is when you only hire postdocs, then they are kind of let loose later. And Mellon pushed us, and we welcomed the push to say, actually, no, we're going to be hiring tenure track people. And that was, again, the departments, many of them were excited about that. Others were like, whoa, you're giving away a position, what's going on, et cetera. And we had to do the hard work with every department who wanted to hire to say, nope, this is where we're going. And this was a Mellon initiated but welcomed by us. And Miguel was really the person that had those conversations, again, on that daily basis. By the way, you all are Middlebury grads. You can read. We're not going to be reading every description, but this is just a guide. And you will see the C3 description, which is this big grant from Mellon that we have in collaboration with these other big research universities, later in your handout. And again, reading it would not be helpful, but just talking about our experience of instantiating these programs, we thought would be more inspiring and rigorous for us. And I want to stay, before I get back to bias awareness, I want to stay with faculty and faculty development and that section that you see here called broadening pedagogy. Broadening pedagogy is absolutely essential to us. Part of what happens, and this is a big piece of where we are in higher education. I've just finished a book on the public sphere and the idea of the public sphere and the study of religion. And in thinking about this on an educational basis, I think about the fact that we are no longer, and we never have, as faculty, had the classroom as our private sovereign space. It is no longer, and it never actually has been, our private sovereign space. That means that every time that you teach a class, you're creating a mini public sphere, right? We actually, as Meg just said, we know each other in this room. And even this is it is a mini public sphere. It is not a private sovereign space. And that means a lot of things. Of course, it means things like new rules for classroom about how students use technology, how students report, how students talk about it. Every institution of higher learning is struggling with this. But the other part of it that's so important is it means that thinking about it, here's where curiosity as a rubric really helps get faculty back on board, which is, oh my God, I'm so scared. I've been using these slides for 20 years and they always laugh, but when I put that slide up, they didn't laugh anymore. They took a picture and said, hey, I was insulted, right? Next thing that happened, this is real. This is unvarnished, story from Mid, where another faculty at a faculty meeting, and I was actually proud of us at this moment, got up, 2 of them, and said, that was ironic. Irony used to exist. This is okay. And they are partly right. And 2 younger faculty of color got up and said, you don't get to tell me what I get to be offended by. It wasn't ironic to me. Good. It was in plenary session. There were 200 faculty there. That is an argument for the sake of heaven. And it was hard, and it wasn't easy. And they talked to each other afterwards. That's what I always look for. Healthy public sphere was the scratchy conversation. Did they go and talk to each other afterwards? So this is why broadening pedagogy and saying, wait, no matter how liberal and progressive we think we are, or we think we always have been, we need to be curious and newly curious about who the students are in our classrooms. And so we have 2 different programs this fall, this whole year, an inclusive practitioners program that has 3 different levels to it. It's very exciting to watch. And the second is decolonizing knowledge and pedagogy workshops. Decolonizing knowledge is a tough phrase for some folks, and it tends to be a generational difference. I'm not colonizing anything. I want to just teach science. And that's the conversation that's happening in the broader academy. The world is at Middlebury more intensely, I would say, at Middlebury than even at other places. And what that means is essentially, are there forms of bias in my choice of readings, in the fact that my syllabus may not have works from people of color, from people from the colonized South, if you're looking at social studies, et cetera. There are a number of different things that means. And by the way, the person who is driving that came up to me and said, I'd love to talk to you sometime about the responses I'm getting to people feeling accused, that I have been saying that they're colonizing their own classrooms. And I said, yeah, happy to do that, because that is a tough conversation. But these 2 workshops, faculty are hungry for this. They're really engaged in it. And as one faculty member said to me, I'm no longer nervous when I walk in the classroom because I've got these tools to talk across difference and to be more inclusive and to acknowledge that I always need to be more inclusive in the classroom. Related to that, always, is what one of our students said it so beautifully last year. Teach and tell, you guys are great at teach and tell. We're good with that, but we can do that on our own. We need you to guide and advise based on our questions. Now, do we do everything that the students ask us to do? No. But we are very clear that what is effective now is no longer what those of us who were trained 2 or 3 decades ago is our natural instinct, which is teaching and telling. So I wanted to just let you know about those. Those are, again, really vibrant and happening, and we're excited about those. Miguel, do you want to add anything to that?
That was pretty comprehensive. I was realizing as you were talking that there was one thing that we didn't put on the list. Well,
Yeah.
probably there are a number of things that we didn't put on the list, but one was the engaged listening.
Yes.
And I think it was last year, received a quick grant again from the Mellon Foundation, in this case $800,000, to work on what we've called engaged listening. So one is, how to deal with, the controversial speakers and those difficult conversations that we're having, and how to engage. It's very important. And so there's sort of two pieces to it. One is a different format that we've created in our speakers when they're coming here, and engaging with our neighbors before the speaker starts, and talking about what we're expecting from this. The speakers have spoken, and then stopping and then actually checking in with our neighbors and saying, what did you hear? And, and kind of comparing notes. And that it humanizes a lot ourselves and our responses, and the speakers have been fabulous about joining that. The second piece is a set of teaching fellows. And so I think it's 9 per semester have been part of this, volunteer faculty members. We're going to work on tools on how to have these challenging, critical conversations in the classroom, and they use one of their classes as a model for this. And then those 9 come back together and really share out all the tools. So it's almost a train the trainers program in some ways. And there's actually a great website. If you look up engaged listening on the website, and you can find a toolkit that's come out of this, which is useful for anyone on dealing with critical conversations, dealing across difference, and engaging others. So that's just one other example.
Yeah, great, wonderful. I next want to turn to the leadership opportunities that we are giving students to help them be leaders in inclusive practices. And the most spectacular one, of course, is BOLD. We received a wonderful set of ongoing grants from the Pussycat Foundation, which is Helen Gurley Brown's wonderful name for her foundation. And through the incredible work of one of our trustees, we have developed a leadership training scholarship program that focuses on women of color who we have already identified through an application process as leaders in the community. And they go through a regular leadership seminar workshop every year. They also travel outside the country and do leadership work. We have been partnering in the past with the wonderful school in Afghanistan that one of our graduates, Shabana, has started. We did training of bold scholars with the students at the school in Afghanistan. It was incredibly exhilarating to see. We've also going to be working with our bold scholars next in the Indian field hockey training that is in the state of Jharkhand. These are some of the poorest people who are at risk, whose families are at risk for becoming involved in terrorist activities. And one of the great pathways forward for women, too, are working in the police and playing field hockey and doing sports. And so our field hockey team plus our bold scholars are going to be connecting with them in late January. Bush Hockey has been the kind of leader. We went all together. I joined the bold cohort to meet with Michelle Obama last spring. It was extraordinary. Take it away. Sorry, we don't have a mobile mic here. There you go. There, that works. Go ahead.
So for Bold, I think what has been incredible is really providing these amazing young women and working with them to think about what does leadership mean when you are going to lead consequential and engaged lives. And particularly when you experience a sense of being the other or a sense of being on the margin on this campus, and then how do you overcome some of those or negotiate some of those? You shouldn't have to necessarily overcome everything. How your identity is really empowering, and how do you negotiate with other barriers that are out there? So one of the things we are doing with the BOLD program is that the students do an internship in the US in their first summer after they become BOLD scholars, and then we follow up with the international immersive experience to really see how do you engage globally, which is one of the other thing that we are really aspiring towards, is that you live Middlebury, ready to address world's most challenging problem. And we are doing that in a way so that they lead themselves, right? So I am very fortunate, and our Bold site director, Elaine Hammond, facilitate, but what we focus on is really how do they lead each other? So how do they engage with difficult conversation with each other? And the selection process has been really effective, where we have, we just started working with our fourth Bold cohort of students, is that they're all coming from very different background. So also get a sense of this identity, that there is no one such thing as you identify as a person of color. That's not an umbrella. There are many, many challenges. There are many, many nuances. Their lived experiences, even on this campus and outside, are very different. And how do they negotiate within that? So that we are not, again, replicating us versus them, but acknowledging all the differences that makes us such a strong community.
Great, thank you. I'll go, the next leadership arena that I want to focus on, and then we'll go a little more quickly through some of the other things that we're putting in place, is first generation students. When we did a study, a quick poll actually of people in a workshop a year and a half ago, one of the things that was really interesting was students were asked, what's the thing that students, faculty, and staff all together in the room were asked, what's the thing that is most difficult in terms of difference on this campus? And race was the second highest, but class was the highest. And I think that's a big issue. Now, I will say, and it's important to say, that the study that we did of our own financial aid practices in 2014-15, and we need to redo that study now, we are actually quite good at the funding the middle class in our financial aid. We have far less of a bell curve in terms of the wealthy students and then the full scholarship students, there are a much larger percentage, 20 to 30% of the folks on financial aid are in that donut hole, that middle class. So we're pleased about that. We need to be vigilant about it, and we'll check it. That being said, the disparity in socioeconomic diversity is still very real on all campuses that are need blind, that have the financial structure that we do. So we feel that it's very important to support first-gen students. And we have a robust program that has really kind of taken off. It was written up in the Times about a year and a half ago, which we were thrilled about. The idea is to bring students of first gen here with their families for 4 days and work as intensively with their families as we do with students about what it's like to be at a place like Middlebury, what classes are like, why office hours matters, what is office hours, et cetera. It's so important on so many levels. And we found that holistic approach of welcoming the families as well as the students has made a big difference. And there are some really very moving moments. Part of what I love about it is you have the kids from Iowa who've been on a farm their whole life, et cetera, and you have kids from Brooklyn, Posse kids from Brooklyn. You have all of it coming together, and that is an extraordinary thing to see. And the student peer mentors have gotten really excited about being peer mentors. I have them over for dinner every year now, and that's been really wonderful to watch too. So that's a program that continues to deepen, and I'll turn to both of you to comment on this. We're very excited about this as a program. We go. All right. I'm going to move the glasses now.
So, as I said in my comments yesterday, I believe a lot of this is about building community, so that students feel as though a sense of belonging, a sense of connection, that they're not alone, that it wasn't a mistake, that they're not the only person of this sort. And so, as Lori said, we have the pre-enrollment program, but that then the peer mentoring continues throughout. In that peer mentoring period, I just want to share something that I think is really great. At one moment, we have the students go off with faculty, and the faculty just tell them a little bit about what the expectations are in the classroom, what the rhythms are of the semester, how to grapple with all that reading, for instance. And as we were putting this program together, I thought there's got to be 4 faculty members out there who are first gen themselves. Would it be possible to find them and see if they're available? And every year we've been able to have faculty do that who are first gen themselves. So not only are they sharing this, but they're also serving as, hey, things can work out pretty well. And when I reached out, I had such feedback that we now have 55 faculty members who were first gen students themselves at college. And that we bring those folks together with the students for community meals. And again, it's about creating community, that now there's almost this sort of badge of honor of being a first-gen student. And last year we did a graduation celebration for those first-gen folks because it was particularly special. While they're with the faculty, we take the parents aside and talk to them about 2 things. One is, this is what your student's likely to be going through this year. Be ready for this. They're going to be ups and they're going to be downs, and they might have these kinds of questions, and help them on how to answer those questions. The answer isn't, oh, come home, right? It's just too much, but really kind of work them through that. And the second part is, this is what you are likely to go through when you're getting that phone call, and how to prepare for that. So that's been really helpful. I'll stop there.
That's great.
Do you want anything?
Yeah, so I just want to quickly add.
You don't need to change it because
Our orientation Miguel's office does this amazing job, and then what I try to do, or my team try to do through student life, is how do we sustain some of that throughout the whole year? Because we do the training, and then classes start, and the everyday challenges show up. So I'll give a very small, granular example. Couple of students recently came to tell me that, and this is something that we don't even think about unless the student tell us and make us wiser, is if you are somebody on full financial aid, the college provides you with a laptop. But the laptop has this big sticker that says the property of Middlebury College. And which is important, but it doesn't have, we can place the sticker in a different way maybe not on the outside, maybe somewhere in the inside and a smaller number. Little things like that. Another example is our international student and scholar services office used to do a coat closet, mostly for international students who were never exposed or understood the severity, like myself, of the Vermont weather. We are now realizing that the need goes way beyond just international student. So how do we create a community, sustain these efforts that helps the students thrive? Those are some really tiny examples. And so Miguel and I, we collaborate closely on providing additional support. So something like, can all students ski down if they want to during Feb graduation? Can they fly home if there is a family emergency and they really need to go see a parent who is receiving some kind of medical care? So we partner very closely to make sure that goes back to the earlier point President Patton made about access throughout the 4-year.
And I should just mention what's not on this. We did everything we could, and then we realized that there are like 3 or 4 more things that we needed to tell you about that aren't on here. But one of them is consolidating all the funds that we have on campus for students who might need emergency or other kinds of help. Textbook help, because their budget has gone. Emergency fly home, any number of other things. It's a really interesting thing, again, just to give you a flavor of our daily reality. As someone who wants a full support, saddle, lessons, et cetera, for equine training, who's a posse student, that was a harder one for us, right? Do we do the whole 9 yards for horse training? I think we said yes to that one in the end. I believe we did, and we asked the person to be careful about their budget as they continue to train and get other horse equipment. But it's a really interesting question that, every day you get a situation where it's a puzzle to figure out. And I want to just stay in that now to move to the question of student support and student training, right? So if I were an alum, I'd say, great, on the faculty, how are you dealing with 18 to 22-year-olds whose point at 18 to 22 is to create identity, to create boundaries, and are deeply impatient for change, legitimately and rightly so, and because they're mid-students, have a profound moral compass as well. And so we've done a number of different things there, and I want to spend a little time explaining to you those things. The first is that we have ongoing, not just training at the beginning, although we do have training in a number of different areas at the beginning of a student's time here in orientation, about talking about differences, talking across differences, and diversity of viewpoint training, which is very important. Inclusivity does include welcoming a conservative voice, and that's something that is part of the Mellon grant that Miguel was talking about. But we also have ongoing training throughout the year. So Just Talks is something the students, again, the best way that academic change happens, have a party and see who comes, and allow students to work with you on their best ideas. And Just Talks was a great idea, and it is in the J term. It's student-to-student, peer-led around inclusivity and inclusive practices. It is now being mentored a little bit more by our Director for Equity and Inclusion, and she's Renee Welsh. She's an educator who's had a lot of experience in driving these workshops. So this is going to be something that isn't just at J-term now, but that is expanded throughout the spring semester. So we're very excited about that. Another area in elite colleges, this is such a hard statistic. The attrition rate is at least 10 and usually 20% higher in the STEM fields than it is in non-elite colleges. Why? Because you feel like a failure if your SAT score is 720 and you get sent to remedial. That doesn't happen at Middlebury, but it does happen in other places. We have a big concern around this. I feel very passionately about this. We are in the midst of getting another Howard Hughes Medical Institute grant to work on inclusivity in STEM, where I see students, Miguel was talking earlier about perseverance, where the most challenge to perseverance comes are in the tiny everyday moments where pick a lab partner, wait. The kid who has had, 5 AP science courses is going to pick the other kid who has also had 5. She's also had 5 AP science courses. And students do not have, generally speaking, at 18, the maturity to say, wait, I'm going to risk my grade if I choose someone who I know has not had AP courses, right? That's socioeconomic. That can also be racialized. There are so many different ways in which that's an issue. So training our faculty in the STEM courses, we're really moving in that way in some really wonderful ways. We have a STEM pedagogy group that deals with these questions all the time. We are developing a course that I've done at other places called the Red Shirt course, which is red shirts on the team are like, wow, we really need you on this team. And you may not play all the time, but we absolutely need you on the team. Like our wonderful first-year student who, in his first game, scored a touchdown yesterday, right? I mean, that was a student of color who was welcomed on the team, and it was just a fantastic moment. So that's what we need, right? We need in the STEM fields exactly this kind of radical shift around what our inclusive pedagogy looks like. And we have a student group called You Are STEM, which is also doing peer mentoring. And we also now are supporting a summer program. We have 3 posses, as you know. We're one of the highest posse numbers of our peer cohort. And we have a STEM posse that we now are expanding the summer program for the STEM posse students from LA to include a number of other students who need that training and engagement. Susan DeSimone is working on that. So those are the myriad ways that we are also working with students to manage this. And I know that these two have been like in the trenches around this and would love to hear more from either of you if you want to say more.
I'll say that Lori mentioned the STEM pedagogy group, and so this is faculty in the STEM areas, and they've noticed this attrition a lot. A lot of students from underrepresented backgrounds start in STEM and don't continue with the major. And so historically, they've said, well, you know, they came from weaker schools, they couldn't hack it, that kind of thing, and move forward. And now they're starting to think, well, maybe it's the way we're teaching it, or maybe it's the way we're approaching it. And so really working on, you know, what are the pedagogies that we can do that can change that. So the chemistry department kind of working with the flipped classroom to address some of these things. The biology department trying to reduce the size of that introductory class and making small sizes, and so restructuring things in that way. And really working on different types of inclusive pedagogies in order to maintain those folks. Does it have something to do with who we have as TAs in the class? And just really thinking about everything they're doing to try to increase the success rate in the fields. That's just one example.
That we are also trying to see how do we support the work that's happening inside the classroom, outside of the classroom. So we are providing more training to the deans who work with the student, making sure that they connect the students also to other resources like the Center for Teaching, Learning and Research. So if a student is, the challenge is about time management, they're connected to those resources early on, or making sure that the student's aware of other well-being resources on campus. So we are also making sure that our colleagues in the student life are better prepared, better trained to match what's happening in the classroom, so there is more holistic support.
And we'll just go through, for the last 5 minutes or so before we open it up, a couple of other important things. One is a structural issue. The DACA, the Dreamers that were part and parcel of the Obama administration's moves towards national inclusivity, we have supported the push to make sure that those Dreamers, the DACA students, can remain part of our community. We also made the decision 2 years ago to include them not as international students in assessing financial aid, where we are need aware and not need blind, but as American students. That meant that 1 year our numbers, and we don't keep a list, we don't keep a list very intentionally, but we do keep an informal list in our heads, and the number of DACA students on our campus shot up from about 9 to about 23 in 1 year because of that change in financial aid policy, which means that there's more of a cohort. It means that, again, we got our best students. We don't read with that in mind, but we do give financial aid in that way now, new policy. That's a structural issue. Another important structural thing that we've done is create a faculty committee on diversity and inclusion and equity. A standing faculty committee that's part of our governance structure. That has proved to be really helpful on any number of levels. Faculty feel that there's a place to go. Students feel that there's something as part of our governance structure. They also, in the SGA, have a committee on inclusion and inclusivity that they're very active and engaged and work with that faculty committee. Those are new structures that we put in place in the last 2 or 3 years. Student committee has been in place longer than that. The other thing that Miguel has worked incredibly hard on is universal design. That is a basic understanding of a physically built space that says you should not, if you are a person with disabilities, you should not have a special experience, a different experience of access to a building or to a classroom. So the principle of universal design is everyone should have as close to the same experience of a building or a class or a syllabus as possible. So every new building or renovated building, like what we're doing with Monroe, will be built as close as possible to those principles of universal design and stay within budget. I know that's really hard, but I've asked the team to do it and they're doing it. And in addition, syllabus design. Miguel is working really hard with his team. He heads a group on disability and access on creating syllabi and websites that are accessible. And that's just an incredibly important long-term thing. This campus is one of the least physically accessible of our peers because we're built in the mountains. So the 3 big building projects, capital projects, that we have prioritized in the last 3 years, Monroe, Warner, and Johnson, are all the ones on campus that are not accessible. That's a signal to the campus about how we care about accessibility. You want to say anything more about that structural AgDI work?
Yeah, right, the advisory group works not just on the physical piece, but also the pedagogical piece as well. On the physical example of universal design, our buildings meet code, but that's not the same. An example would be if somebody with some sort of mobility issues, there's an access, but oftentimes it's going around the back to get in a different manner. So the idea of universal design is that everybody would be able to use that same entrance. And an example of that is if you look at the front of the chateau, there used to be steps there, and if you look now, there's a gentle grade going up to the front door. That was something that our facilities folks came up with, and it just changes the experience for some folks, and others don't notice the difference. And that's kind of what's behind that idea of universal design. Universal design in the classroom is creating aspects where a student with disabilities oftentimes has to jump through several hoops in order to have the same type of education as someone else. And it's trying to remove those hoops. Can we build things into the class so that there doesn't have to be those extra steps, that going to the ADA office to get your paperwork through so that you can get assigned a note taker, so then you have to find a note taker that shows up at the class, it stands out, that kind of thing. Well, some faculty members, what they've done is they've made note-taking part of the class. So it's a shared activity that gets passed around, that everybody benefits from that, because you're taking notes for the entire class. You're thinking a little more attentively about your notes. You're also learning how other people take notes and learning from that. Everybody benefits, and it's reduced a burden for another individual. So it's kind of a win-win. Those are examples of the universal or inclusive design approaches.
And then we'll end with some things that are happening just now, breaking news, which is really exciting. The first thing to say is we are now have over 100 folks trained in restorative practices, which is another piece of creating inclusion when there is harm in the community. Restorative practices is based from or originates from the restorative justice movement. However, it is different because it's about the things that a community can do every day when there's harm. And that means it's based on the principle of circles, of gathering in circles, and stating impact. It is a really wonderful peace-building tool. I'd say about 10 to 20 universities and colleges have adopted it. We've adopted it here. Boishaki's done an incredible job. Miguel also in training folks and being trained themselves. I'd say at least 4 or 5 of our folks on our senior team are trained in restorative practices. And we have watched our students mediate conflict differently. So when something happens, and it used to be organize, protest, demand a president statement, and then get published in the New York Times, which is what happened a couple years ago at Smith when a student of color fell asleep in the dining rooms. We had the exact same thing happen here, exact same script of a white custodial person talking to them, and then a public safety officer. The student felt that they were being singled out for being a student of color, and they moved and decided immediately to go into restorative practices circle, which was exactly the way we kind of want to keep moving. All of our residential life staff is now trained in this area as well. So that's burgeoning, and we want to deepen that as much as possible. We approved a Black Studies major. We've been trying to do that for decades for any number of reasons, and good legitimate ones, as well as, in my view, ones that were more based on unconscious bias. We weren't able to get that approved until last year, but last year, what we've approved as a Black Studies major is a 2019 version of it. It's transnational, it's global in scope, and we're very excited about it. We just have heard of a bequest that will allow us to make a big hire, we hope, in this area. So like literally breaking news of the last week. We've also hired someone to help support our LGBTQIA+ community, which is been a real need on campus, that we have been able to meet in a number of different ad hoc, well-intentioned ways, but now we have a person who is the assistant director of our Anderson Freeman Center, who will be working with that community, which is really wonderful. We also have inaugurated something that's called the Twilight Project. Many other universities, I'd say 5 or 6 other universities and colleges, are looking at their own archives for their own racial history. And it's an incredibly exciting thing to be doing, partly because we have a really great relationship with the Middlebury community, and we're going to be working not only in our own archives, and Rebecca Irwin, who's a fantastic person in special collections, is going to be working with us, but we're going to be working with the Sheldon Museum, with other places, to look at difficult moments in Vermont's history and in Middlebury's history as a way of healing. So that's called the Twilight Project. It's focused on Alexander Twilight, and we will have events related to his matriculation year and graduation year coming up. And finally, Miguel will be heading the strategic planning group that, just like Energy 2028, we need strategic plan that is exhortative, that is exciting, and forward-looking around all the work we do on equity and inclusion. And Miguel is working on that now, and we'll be rolling that out in the next 2 or 3 months. We have been talking a lot. We will stop talking now, but we wanted to make sure you got the full texture of the kind of work we're doing. And we'll open it up for questions and comments.
Well, thank you. Very full discussion on that. I'm George Cady. I graduated in 1972. And when I reflect back on my experience at Middlebury, I feel that I got the full Middlebury experience. Back in the day, my parents paid for the education, and that was true typically of almost all students back then. You didn't really hear about debt that you graduated with for most of us. But my parents made it very clear that I was here to get an education, to participate in what the school had to offer, and that meant for me athletics, student government, various clubs, And I felt like I was a relatively big fish in a relatively small pond. Now, my concern about the students today is that one of the things, we certainly talk a lot about the amount of debt students graduate with. We hear about that a lot. But I haven't heard anything about the work-study program in the sense that students who are on financial aid, and a lot of minorities, students of color, are part of that, that if they have to work 20 hours a week or whatever it may be as part of their financial aid package, they don't have time to have the full Middlebury experience in the same way that I did. And I've looked at some of our athletic teams, and I look and I said, boy, I wish they had a couple more students of color on them. Why can't they get a couple more? And then I was talking to some people and thinking about it, and they said, well, you know, if they have to work 20 hours a week, how can you also play a sport and do the, you know, the amount of work that you have to do? So my concern is that, are we not allowing many of our students to have the full experience if they have to work as many hours as they do on campus? And I guess where I'm coming from is, I know we have a financial aid budget, but I'd rather have a few less students on financial aid, but let them have the full experience. Don't let them, force them to work as much as they have to.
Yeah, a great question, and something we struggle with and have thought a lot about. So I'll turn to Miguel first, and Boishaki, and then we can talk a little bit about what we're doing to address that.
Yeah, there's a lot there. First, the conflating of the athletics with it. You know, I think athletics in 1972 were different than athletics in 2019, in that the time that they're putting into it, the expectations of where they're coming from, the level of of play is a little bit different. But that's besides the point. One of the ways we've tried to address it, and Lori made reference to this with some of the funding that we've got. So we've had some donors that have been really generous, that have we've created what we're calling the Seizing Opportunities Fund. That Lori gave the example of the the equestrian. Some of the there's a PE class that it's just $50, so that's not a big deal for many people, but for some people that really is significant, so we can pay for that. Equestrian is more expensive. But with that fund, we've also done some things. For instance, in winter term, what we found is courses like Midcore that are all-in courses. It's really 8 to 5 plus, that they're just fully immersed in this for the entire month of January. We were finding that we weren't getting the kinds of students that you were talking about in that class. And as we dug deeper, it was because they had to work, and they couldn't take a class that was 8 to 5 because they had to fit work into there. So what we've been able to do with that is we've been able to do these grants where we give them $500, which is the equivalent of a 10-hour week for the month of January, so that they can take that course. There's an EMT course. There's a computer science course that's like this, to try to break down those financial barriers. So there's work that we've been doing around the financial barrier to be able to help with some of those aspects, to try to give students the full participation at Middlebury. Athletics is a whole different kettle of fish, and to me, NESCAC has put barriers on the way the coaches recruit that has affected the numbers that are in the pool for the sports. But that's a longer story.
But definitely worth talking about. So it's been one of the things that Middlebury is leading on in NESCAC is it hosts with Trinity, and has hosted in the last 2 years a conference on recruiting for New England college sports for small colleges, hosted by NESCAC, but much broader, so we've got lots of other folks joining us. Believe it or not, Middlebury is, and it statistically leads in the number of students of athletes of color. The numbers are small, and the number of coaches of color. not absolutely top for student, but more top, and that's competing with places like Wesleyan and some places that are in more diverse places than Vermont. So we're happy about that, but the numbers are small. It's a very wide New England problem. We did take off the restrictions that Miguel was referring to let coaches go all over the place to recruit. It's still, if you're from Texas, you're say an African-American student from Texas, you're gonna more likely wanna go, and we know this for a fact, to a big state school. So you have to make the case for D3, you have to make the case, all of that. That doesn't matter. Again, my response to that is, and go out and do it. So we have made a lot of progress, but you're absolutely right. It's one of the places where we need to continue to work on diversity, and we know it's an area-focused problem. In terms of financial aid, just to remind everyone here, we cap student loans at $16,000. It's one of the reasons why we feel that to have skin in the game and graduate with the debt of a car max is appropriate. There are schools that have that have $23 million or $33 million endowments that can not have student loans. We're not in that position right now, or work study. However, it is back to my original statement about leading at a time of inequity, right, of wealth inequity. This becomes even more of a pressure point. So we want to be aware of it. We want to be encouraging of students who do work on work study to become leaders, and we've worked with their advisors to help the advisors be aware that it's not the same, for everyone. Somebody whose financial aid package includes work. There's an entire other approach in higher education which Middlebury cannot take, being the biggest employer in Addison County, and that is entirely work study. Everyone on financial aid. That's Berea College, that's Woodrow Wilson College. I love that model, but we can't do that in Addison County given our employer status. And I know Boychukki's had some good experience with this as well.
Yeah, so what I wanted to add to answer your question specifically is, while we cannot, can everybody hear me?
Yeah, they just turned you off.
While we cannot just waive the work study requirement for everybody who's on financial aid, a lot of it has to do with FAFSA regulation. But what we do is, depending on individual student situation, we do waive their summer earning requirements. So we do that routinely for individual student depending on their situation. So we do support them in that way. So at least with their summer earning requirement waived, they can participate in many of the things, including Midcore. For example, I think the education major program is a more extensive one, where we waive a lot of their FAFSA, work study requirements, so that education majors can teach in the local school to get their teachers training certification. So we do that during the school year, as where a big number of students, we do waive it for the summer.
And a final note is that the third big pillar of our campaign is called comprehensive student experience. And what we mean by that is, for example, to make sure that every single student who wants to go to the summer school, language school, will be able to get full financial aid there, not just full financial aid at Middlebury, would cost us $2 or $3 million per year every year. Totally good. We don't have that in our budget right now, given our other commitments and wanting to really be fiscally responsible. So that's part of what we're doing in our campaign, is making sure we could say, I hope 10 years from now, we will be able to say, you can do the math in terms of what a $3 million endowment would look like. We can raise the money to be able to make that happen. So that's part of the long-term work that we're trying to do. Hey.
Boychukki made a comment, actually you caught yourself. And it was the best thing I've heard in all of this. You said something about overcoming. No, I mean the students will learn to navigate. And that it hit me to the core. I'll tell a little bit of my story. I came here to play football. That's why I know Middlebury. I had never heard of this place. Coach came down, recruited me from Long Island. Catholic kid, middle class. Come to Vermont. I didn't even know where Vermont was. Show up here. My mom and dad drive me up, drop me off at football camp. That's when we actually used to come like a week early and be segregated and all that. And I didn't know this, but my father told my mother as he was driving back down Route 30, our son does not belong here. My mom didn't tell me that for like years, so that was sort of weird. First Parents' Weekend, we used to get I actually still have the piece of paper with who your roommate was, where your room was going to be, all that stuff. And I said, I'm going to be roommates with this kid, Steve Tripp, from Laconia, New Hampshire. Actually, I probably shouldn't say his name, based on the story. And,
Too late now,
it
Bob.
turns out he was a football player, and we were like Bobsy twins. I mean, we'll remember. I mean, we did everything together. I mean, I was a right guard, he was a left guard. I mean, we were the identical position on the other sides of the center, and it was we had the most wonderful relationship. It was fantastic in the little rooms, and family weekend, the father, just unbelievable. He meets my parents, and we're at dinner, and he literally said to my parents, and I was so upset that I found out that my son was going to be roommates with an Italian. He probably said Guinea or something like that, and I was going to call the college and make him change that. But you people are so nice. I never overcame that. In fact, I left Middlebury by the end of the first year. Hated the place. I mean, loved the place, hated the people. Didn't understand how to cope, live. I was not included. I was a butt of many jokes. I mean, Will probably remembers. But then I left and I came back. And I didn't necessarily overcame, but I learned how to navigate. And so what I've taken through all this experience is that humans have an infinite ability to discriminate and not include. Yeah. We will never be done.
Yes.
Ever.
That's exactly right.
These are not like projects, they're not even initiatives.
It's not a checklist.
For students to learn that they're never going to overcome, because what's going to happen is the group that we include today, today in the New York Times, I just popped it open before running off to breakfast. I think it's in the magazine because I read it on an iPad. When did Italian Americans become white?
White.
I was like,
Jewish
of course. So whoever's included today will discriminate tomorrow. That's what we have to teach. And I don't think we'll ever fix it. We came out of Africa 70,000 years, whatever. We're not fixing this next week or next year or in our lifetime. So it's where I think it's happening here, but that's probably the most important dialogue.
Yeah.
Is how do we learn to navigate the human nature?
That's right. There's a wonderful person from Harvard who I'm hoping to get here next fall. Her schedule is very amazing. I was just at a Leakey Foundation conference with her. She works on unconscious bias. And the great news about her is that she is, her name is Professor Bazanji. She has been doing this work for 15 years, and it showed that in all of her testing, we've actually overcome, we're better, we haven't overcome, back to your point, Bo, that we have gotten better around racial bias. We have gotten better about LGBTQI plus bias. We have not gotten better on bias and body size, for example, right? So, and her tests are all about the cognitive load. It's not about, do you like this person or would you welcome this person? Welcome itself being a form of bias, right? It's my table and I'll welcome you, right? But the cognitive load that it takes for you to overcome. It's an incredibly sophisticated test, and she is in it for the rest of her life. And she said, I want my graduate students to continue to work in this because it is long-term and forever. Miguel, say something.
It's the IAT, right? The Harvard test, the IAT. Yeah,
Yeah.
I encourage everybody to go on to the Harvard site and look at the IAT test. And you can, it's a test that you do on the computer in all kinds of different areas. So race, class, gender, body size, religion, and you find out where your biases are, and it's really it's worthwhile for everyone to do it.
And I'll end. I know we need to move to other things now, but I want to say two things. One is a hard thing, and the other is a hopeful thing. The hard thing is we are in an alumni conversation, and Friends of Middlebury conversation. There is a debate at Mid, more broadly in our alumni community, about whether we should be giving so much financial aid, and whether we should be as diverse as we are. And I want to make sure you know that this is why we need alumni help. It should be abundantly obvious that as a leader for Middlebury in this role, I feel very passionately about this, and have devoted and will continue to fundraise for as many resources as we can for that long-term conversation. It is not a conversation that is absolutely given, even at Middlebury among the alumni community. And so we're going to need help. We're going to need advocates. We're going to need folks who understand what this work is. Thank you, Bubba, for understanding that, and also help us work and have those conversations in the alumni community. There is a cost to this leadership, and I mean that in the sense it's going to take a lot of time, and not everyone is in agreement. And the second thing I would say, religious diversity is something that doesn't usually get talked about. It happens to be my area of specialty, but we have just received a very big grant, big for Arthur Vining Davis in this initiative, on about $100,000 on moving forward with our leadership on religious diversity. It's very exciting. We have two things. One, we have a group called Mosaic, which is frequently in the forefront of things like the Muslim ban, and thinking about what that means in terms of religious diversity, thinking about a fabulous moment last year that was very hard for everyone when Hillel said, we want our own space, and the yoga, Hindu-based, but not necessarily all Hindu yoga folks said, could we please use your space? And everyone thought, of course, everyone should share a space initially, and then the Hillel people said, actually, the history of Jews at Middlebury isn't perfect, isn't great. We really need our own space. Can you look somewhere else? It was a long conversation. It was very much student-driven. And the yoga people said, yep, we got it. That was a success in a really good way. It was a deeply meaningful, good conversation. We also have an interfaith house where we have atheists, Buddhists, Shinto, many flavors of Christian, Jewish, etc., people living intentionally side by side and talking about religious difference. And so we're very excited about this. And the next thing we're going to be doing is this grant will be funding a series of interns and fellows to deepen interreligious conversation on campus. So just to end with that really exciting note.
We had one more question.
Yeah, absolutely, go. I think people are here for the conversation, so that's great. Hi, Jason.
More of a comment than a question. So, Jason Robart was class of '87. My children were class of 15 and 17. And let me say, I'm so grateful that this conversation is taking place, and frankly proud of the school that this conversation is taking place. My experience in getting here in September of '83 is radically different from the experience that my two children had. And thank you to you and the administration for that. Your comments on financial aid, I think, are spot on. The answer is yes. We have to continue down this path. I fortunately served on two school boards in Massachusetts, two independent schools, and we're having this conversation. One is a K through 8, and one's a high school, and we're having this conversation. And I'm so hopeful that you won't take a step backwards on this. I had a similar experience to some extent that you did. I got here in '83. I lived in Stewart, and there was one other African American in the dorm, and we were roommates. And I thought, this is interesting. And to think about, the college has certainly made progress in terms of diversity and numbers, but it wasn't an inclusive campus at the time. And while there certainly is still work to do, again, it's light years difference. Seeing it as a parent now and the experience that my children had. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. Really nothing more to say, except, again, to thank everyone for being here, for sharing their experience and for really working in the everyday ethic and developing that everyday ethic, which I think is deeply Middlebury for all of us. So thanks for being here.
I will say that I'm going to hang out and make my way through all of those